this message arrive? The last category. And then just click off play a sound. See where it says play a sound? Just uncheck it. No, that should do it. Thank you. I'll have to remember how to turn it back. Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar this afternoon. Before we get started, I think Alejandra is going to give us some instructions on how to get into the interpretation for the Spanish.
Thank you very much. Yes, recognizing that the migration phenomenon not only crosses borders, but also language barriers, this event will offer simultaneous translation. So if you are more comfortable following the event on Spanish, please follow the next instructions. Muchas gracias a todos. Si usted desea seguir este evento.
Thank you all. If you wish to follow this event in Spanish, please. If you are in a computer, in the bottom part of your Zoom screen, you will find the symbol of interpretation. It looks like a small globe.
Seleccione ese símbolo y puede escoger el idioma de español y así seguirá a Hilda Murillo, nuestra intérprete para esta sesión. Si usted está en un celular o una tablet, usted tiene que ir igualmente al menú inferior, seleccionar la opción más, que tiene un símbolo de 3 pequeños puntos, y escoger la opción de interpretación igual. Es asimismo interpretación de idiomas, un pequeño globo. Repito, porque quizás fui muy rápida. Si usted está en una ventana de la computadora, en el menú inferior, le encontrará la opción de interpretación de idiomas, que es un pequeño globo. Seleccione esa opción y seleccione español. Si usted está en un celular, iPad o tablet, tiene que seleccionar la opción más, que son 3 pequeños puntos, y de ahí seleccionar la opción interpretación de idiomas para que Hilda Murillo pueda ayudarle a seguir este panel en español. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us this afternoon to learn more about Operation Lone Star. For those of you who do not know me, I am Sister Seal Rager, a Dominican sister of Houston, and I am the promoter of justice, peace, and integrity of creation for the community. Before we begin our program, I'd like to go over a few more housekeeping items for the Zoom experience. We ask that you refrain from using the chat feature at this time. It can be distracting to the presenters as well as the participants when these little messages pop up. But we do ask that you put any questions and comments that you have in the Q&A feature, because at the end of the program, we will be having a question and answer session with our panelists. It is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, the Region 12 Justice Promoters. LCWR is an association of leaders of congregations of Catholic women religious in the United States. Founded in 1956, the conference assists its members to collaborate in carrying out their service to further the mission of the gospel in today's world. The focus of today's gathering is from Matthew 25. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Unfortunately, that this gospel mandate is not being followed here in Texas is the subject for this afternoon's webinar. But before we learn about more about Governor Abbott's Operation Lone Star, it is my pleasure to introduce Bishop Seitz, the Bishop of the Diocese of El Paso. He is a longtime advocate for comprehensive immigration reform, and he is a president-elect of the Committee for Migration and Refugee Services for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. Bishop Seitz, welcome, and please lead us in prayer.
Thank you, Sister Seal. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with all of you as you take up this challenging topic. Let's begin with prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Lord Jesus, in the gospel for this coming Sunday, the fourth Sunday of Lent, you provide us with the unforgettable image that reveals to us the unconditional love that your Heavenly Father has for us in the story of the prodigal son. In the Father's welcoming embrace of his wayward son, you teach us that no one is forgotten by you. No one is unloved by you. No one who seeks refuge in you is ever turned away. If you call us, like you, to welcome the sinner with love and compassion, how much more are we called to welcome innocent children, mothers and fathers with their babies, and all those fleeing threats and oppression. Renew the hearts of the people of this great state and nation, the vast majority of whom call ourselves your disciples, bearing the name of Christian, that we might live as we have been taught, while we protect your people from those with criminal intent. Help us also to welcome with a loving embrace those who flee to our borders seeking refuge. Help us to trust that when we are generous in our love, that you will not be outdone in generosity. Transform by your power and our dedicated efforts this Operation Lone Star and any programs like it, that instead of harshly rejecting those in need, the police and military charged with protecting the innocent might let those who arrive at our borders seeking refuge know that they no longer have anything to fear. We ask this in your holy name. Amen.
Amen.
You know,
Thank
we
you,
in the-
Bishop Seitz.
You're
Oh, I'm
welcome.
sorry.
I was invited to make a couple of comments. And
Oh,
I'll
sure, go
follow
ahead.
the
I'm
prayer
sorry.
with that, if I might. We in the church are not political leaders, but leaders in the church can rightly be forgiven if they are tired of any political leaders who try to claim for their own advantage an issue that fundamentally belongs to the gospel. Our role is to call people to the teaching of Christ and to form consciences so that our life and society might be shaped by our discipleship. It is not our role to write laws and policies, but if we are truly living our faith, then we must speak up when these laws and policies run contrary to what we have received. It's good that we're here today. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No problem.
Anyway, so again, we asked the question, why are we here to address Operation Lone Star? Well, as the bishop says, our faith calls us to welcome the stranger and care for the poor. With poverty, climate change, and violence forcing hundreds of thousands to the southern border of the United States for refuge, unfortunately, we do not have any good immigration policies in our state or in our country. Both the federal and state government officials in recent years have been turning to more extreme, desperate, and inhumane measures to thwart asylum seekers and other immigrants in the absence of sensible, comprehensive immigration reform. Some of these efforts, such as separating children from their parents, and now the Ketchen jail, which jails asylum seekers for months without hearings, represents immoral violations of our duty to protect and care for the vulnerable. In March of 2021, Governor Abbott launched Operation Lone Star, which gives the Texas Department of Public Safety, as well as members of the Texas National Guard, the authority to make arrest and jail asylum seekers on trespassing charges. They are jailed for months without hearings. 10,000 Texas military personnel are tied up with this operation. Many of them question why. Last Friday, the Houston Chronicle ran an editorial, Abbott's charade. Governor needs to end his border boondoggle and scrape the pointless Operation Lone Star. They pointed out that it is more of a political ploy than anything during this election year, and also pointed to the misuse and the low morale of the Texas National Guard, as well as the high cost of $2 billion for just this first year, and also mentioned that how that $2 billion could have been spent for more humanitarian aid for the people of Texas. Like so many other oppressive Texas laws, these laws are beginning to be copied in other areas. Arizona is beginning to follow Texas's lead and is considering similar policies and law. Operation Lone Star demands our response and advocacy efforts, both at the local and national levels, to protect immigrants and ensure the just treatment of those who seek asylum in the United States. After we hear from our panelists, we will be posting links to sign-on letters in the chat box. We urge you to sign the letters and invite members of your congregations and/or family and friends to do the same. And now we're going to hear from our panelists. I'm going to introduce all four of them at this time in the order in which they will be presenting to us. First, we have Priscilla Orta, is the Deputy Special Projects Director for Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, which has taken a lead role in working on Operation Lone Star cases. TRLA is a nonprofit agency providing free legal counsel and representation to 23,000 Texans annually. She will be followed by Roberto Lopez, who is the Community Engagement and Outreach Coordinator with the Texas Civil Rights Project. Roberto writes regularly for the TCRP digital magazine created to inspire Texans to fight for civil and human rights. TCRP believes that legal advocacy and litigation are critical tools to protect and advance the civil rights of everybody in Texas, particularly for our state's most vulnerable populations. Missionary of Jesus Sister Norman Pimentel is the Executive Director of Catholic Charities of Rio Grande Valley. She is internationally known for her work with migrants at the Texas border, especially with the Humanitarian Respite Center that provides women, men, children, and infants, refugees, a welcoming place to rest, have a warm meal, and other basic needs before continuing their journey. Sister Norma continues to be an advocate for honoring and restoring the human dignity inherent in all who come to our door. Alicia Torres is an immigrant policy reform advocate for and organizer for ICE out of Austin and Grassroots Leadership Texas. Grassroots Leadership is a nonprofit organization fighting to end for-profit incarceration and reduce reliance on criminalization and detention through direct action, organizing, research, and public education. We will begin with Priscilla. Priscilla, as a lead agency representing men currently incarcerated under OLS, please describe for us what is happening at this time with OLS. What is the status? What is the status? Is the government still jailing people? How many men are being held? And what is the average length of stay?
All right. So actually, at this point in time, the program is expanding, unfortunately. So at this point in time, we know that Webb County, which is where Laredo is, which is probably one of the higher population areas involved in the entire project, is about to start. There have been, I've heard that Maverick County is also getting ready to start, and Jim Hogg County has fully completed. You know, it's up and running. So that means that at this current time, we have, I think, 5 counties that are participating in the program. So you've got Valverde and Kinney, which were participating from the beginning, Jim Hogg, Maverick, Zapata, and then Webb. So I lied, there should now be 6. So what that means is that more people will be incarcerated. And every single county is coming to handle these issues in really different ways. So what I can speak about is Kinney County specifically. So in Kinney County, we still have hundreds, the list changes daily. So we have hundreds of gentlemen who are still being incarcerated, and the length of time being there varies. But I would say the average is between a couple of months, so 2, maybe 3 months. Previously, we were looking at 6 months, 5 months, some people even longer. That has largely slowed down. However, I will say the numbers and the lack of infrastructure for this program mean that occasionally both Trala and other attorneys find out that clients that they thought had gotten bond actually are still there. We recently had a client who we discovered was still being held in detention 3 months after his bond was paid, and he couldn't get out for another month. So although in general, we're looking at a couple of months, the specific cases of suffering and neglect and people simply forgetting that they exist continues to be an issue. And I'm very sorry. Besides, I know you wanted to know how many people and about how long and where it stands today. Was there anything else that you wanted me to point out? I'm sorry, I think I forgot the last part.
Well, can you tell us the average length of stay and how many people are being held? The other thing is, how is this policy unconstitutional, and how are the rights of the immigrants being violated?
So unconstitutionality is, there's a variety of ways we can approach this, but I'm going to stick with a really, really basic one. And actually, Roberto, if you have additional ones from TCRP, please add. But on a basic level, I would argue it's unconstitutional simply because this is the job of the federal government. In the United States, we have different branches, but we also have different responsibilities for states and the feds. And because immigration is a national issue that impacts the entire nation, not just the state of Texas, we have decided through our Constitution that it should only be the federal authorities who are handling immigration questions. And in effect, what we have are DPS officers in Texas National Guard making decisions that are only appropriately made by the federal government. So there are probably many other reasons that this is unconstitutional, but for me, that is the basic premise. And then when we talk about, what does it look like for people to go through this process? How does it violate their rights? We have to start from the premise that these are people who are crossing an area that has been crossed for hundreds of years, that has been crossed without qualms, even as soon as a year ago, with no problems, and who are, for the most part, honestly and truly seeking a better life. For many, that means asylum, and for others, that means labor. There are many, this is growing seasons coming back, working in the fields is coming back. People who are the backbones of our economy, who are coming in to do nothing more than work. These are the groups that we have. And the way that it impacts their rights is a couple fold, especially the asylum seekers. What ends up happening is that they are kept in such inhumane conditions for months at a time that they then are faced with the prospect of repeating the cycle over. So our folks will get jailed, and eventually, months down the line, we'll be able to offer them a plea, or perhaps their families can pay the bond. Then they're transferred to an immigration detention facility, and from there, they will be detained for additional months at a time. Please understand that the conditions at Briscoe are such that even I, someone who has been inside many different immigration facilities for a decade, I'm astonished. We see gentlemen losing 30 pounds over the course of a month or two because there is literally not enough food being given to them. The food that's being given to them is often rotted. These are not people who come expecting, any kind of fancy or grandiose thing. They are normal people, and they are horrified by the food, so they can't eat. We have to beg them to give medications. We have people who have a variety of illnesses, but especially diabetes, and they simply aren't being given their medications for weeks at a time. Anyone who suffered with this illness can tell you that that can do a number. And on the list goes. So how does it how does it conflict with their rights? As you can imagine, after you have been stuck, you come to the United States, you believe you're safe. You believe you found a place where you can finally breathe and just get things together. They truly believe Americans are kind. They truly believe that our laws will protect them, only to find out that not only are you not guaranteed any protection, you also are being accused of being a criminal. You're being locked inside of a jail. You have no idea really why. You truly don't understand how walking by the road could have been such a mistake. And then you have an immigration attorney telling you that you're going to do this all over again in another immigration facility, but this time the bond's going to be $10,000. And so, because just so you know, that is the average bond amount throughout most of the regions of Texas. So because of that, many of them give up. And I cannot emphasize enough the psychological damage of being called a criminal for many of them. For me, I'm like, meh, fine, call me what you want. But for many of them, they're fleeing criminals. They're fleeing people who actively harm, kill, rape, and steal. And to be lumped in with them, it's already another wound on top of the harrowing journey that they've already gone through. So that is sort of what is going on from my perspective. It is unconstitutional because they're simply doing what the federal government's job is, and their rights are being violated because they're being labeled as criminals and simply being prevented from even asking for asylum through the conditions in which they're forced to stay. So that is how it looks from my view, and I'm happy to take questions afterwards or during, however we're going to do this.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much for sharing with us. That was very informative. Roberto, you are a longtime resident of the Texas-Mexico border in counties where OLS is being carried out. How are the communities being impacted? And what are some of the issues residents have expressed to you about OLS?
Yes, thank you. And so like you provided in my introduction, my name is Roberto, and I'm a community outreach coordinator at TCRP. I was born and raised in the Rio Grande Valley, so just, minutes away from the border. I actually recently moved to Austin, and the benefit I think of being here is that I can access a lot of the different, Texas border and hopefully work in other counties outside of just deep South Texas. But my whole life, I have not known the border that I think my grandparents knew and what Priscilla was talking about, where people moved across freely, where things were much less militarized or aggressive or policed. And so my whole life has been just seeing walls and towers and more law enforcement rise up in my home community, where my family has either worked for them because that's sort of the best economic opportunity in the region, or been harassed by them. In the case of my mother, who's been harassed in the past at Border Patrol checkpoints, which exist all across the border region. And so my work in the Texas Civil Rights Project is almost in the negative space of what Priscilla is talking about. So I think we're at TCRP, we're trying to work with the communities who are indirectly impacted by Operation Lone Star. I guess, and that's a little difficult to say indirect, but not, I work with not with the individuals who aren't necessarily in the prisons or who aren't being apprehended by DPS. But the people who are seeing their government or militias come into their home community, who are seeing their government not respond to their needs and instead are going off on this campaign, like that are trying to demonize immigrants and people who are coming across the river. And so what I'm hearing from people from all the way down in Brownsville, in South Texas, up to Kinney County, where sort of like the epicenter of Operation Lone Star is right now, though it is of course expanding, unfortunately, and continues to do so. What we're hearing is just a litany of concerns about fear, aggression, people talking about being locked and loaded. You hear about, in Kinney County in particular, we're working with a group of organizers there. We're working to help develop a group of organizers who can ask questions from their local government officials. But this county in particular has put together a fundraiser and raised $20,000 to buy a drone, which they could give to their deputies to try and apprehend immigrants. This at the same time, there's a lot of drug addiction due to a lack of mental health resources. There are infrastructure challenges in this community. If you think about South Texas and the Rio Grande Valley in particular, there is so much drainage and flooding problems in my home community that every year continues to leave people stranded or affects cars, does millions of dollars in property damage. Children regularly go to their buses, with like soaked, like their they're down to their knees and their feet are soaked with water because their homes are so flooded and the infrastructure is so poor in a lot of regions of the border. And yet just down the street, you'll see a border wall of, $1 million worth of material rise up for a border wall, especially in the Trump years. And it's still happening under President Biden. And then in Del Rio in particular, or Kinney in particular, Brackettville, there's $20,000 for a drone, or there's $3-point-something million from Operation Lone Star, but nothing for mental health addiction or for domestic violence concerns, which people have. So as a lifelong, formerly lifelong border resident, now I'm changed my scene a little bit, but what I've seen is just a clear, just very much misguided priorities and people using the immigration story as an opportunity to sow fear and to build power, as opposed to actually helping people. And what happens is the companies that make these drones profit. The people who have always been in power keep that power and they keep fear alive. And we're not addressing the real needs of everybody. We're not helping children. We're not helping people who are struggling right now, especially as costs go up at the grocery store and at the gas tank, at the gas pump. And so that's what we're trying to do, is connecting with rural communities and telling the story about how Operation Lone Star is very much impacting these individuals and not addressing the real needs that the border has.
Thank you, Roberto. Sister Norma, you have been ministering in the Brownsville, McAllen area for many years, welcoming thousands of migrants. How has OLS affected your ministry, and what are some of the responses from the community law enforcement in your area?
Thank you, Sister Cecile. Thank you, everybody. Well, what already has been shared is pretty much a good understanding of the overall reality of who they are, the immigrants, the refugees who we receive here at the border, and that honestly, unfortunately, Operation Lone Star and actions like that are simply strategized to build fear to our communities here in the United States. It's not based on facts, on realities of who we are welcoming, who actually are entering our country and And for the most part, when it involves us personally, we actually work very closely with Border Patrol. Border Patrol actually brings us the families that are allowed to remain in the United States to continue the process of asylum in the United States. And so it is not people who are illegal. You know, they're at this point when we receive them and we help them, they're actually families who have a document that gives them permission to travel in the United States and can continue. So they have every right to be in the United States the moment that Border Patrol releases them and puts them in our hands. And so to criminalize our actions as if we're doing something wrong it's really creating misinformation to the overall community in the United States, thinking that what we're doing is illegal, what we're doing is harboring, what we're doing is actually wrong. And it's unfortunate to hear our elected leaders demonize and talk as if what we're doing is wrong, and refer to them as illegals as if they continue to be illegal when they have already entered into a legal process in the United States. And I just find that unfortunate that we must rely on our leaders to govern and to correctly use funding for the good of our communities, and that is not happening. You know, it's unfortunate that it's politicized and is used to their own benefits to showcase themselves as possible. I don't know what political plans they may have, but instead of really truly addressing the needs that our communities locally and have. And so thankfully we continue to do what we do, which is what is good. It's responding as a community to the care of the many immigrants that are released and allowed to be in the United States. And so that will continue to be our focus, and we will continue to do that. And it hasn't interfered as of now, and we hope we can always do that. And I know that there are many in support of the work that we do, and we thank all the others who are fighting to bring those policies and those actions down and correct it.
Okay, so are there any actions that we as people of faith can take to raise our voices in opposition to OLS?
I think yes, definitely, sister. I think we must hold our elected officials accountable to stand for policies that are correct, that are definitely contribute to the well-being of everybody. And if a policy is truly deceptive and wrong, we must challenge it and bring it down and help correct it. And so the more we're able to speak and to hold our elected officials accountable for their actions and what they're doing and what they're supporting, I think educating them is definitely a good way to start.
Right, great, thank you. Alicia, grassroots leadership has been working with men who have been imprisoned under OLS initiative and their families. And I think that you have a video that you want to show that a family member is telling her story about what it's like to have her husband imprisoned. Is that correct?
So it's actually not a video, it's a voice call.
Voice. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a voice. Yes. And I knew that, having heard it, but I guess. So anyway, do you want to start with that, or do you have some other things that you want to share with us first about what grassroots does to help, is helping now with families?
Yes, so I'll answer that in two ways right now. So I will go ahead. I just want to name that as grassroots leadership, we actually work very closely at the intersection, right? What something people term crimmigration, right? But that really what that means is just we work very closely at that intersection of the immigration system and the criminal justice system, right? And that has come, the reason why that is important is in a state like Texas, where the interconnectedness is ever more growing, right? It is important for people to understand, not just people that are directly impacted, but people that want to advocate, or people that want to be allies, conspirators, right? In ensuring that everybody is able to live a good life. we need to understand the tools that are used against us, right? And we realize that as immigrants, the criminal justice system is ever more being pointed and weaponized against us. And so I wanted to name the importance of that, because the way that grassroots leadership, or the reason why grassroots leadership is even involved in Operation Lone Star, right? Something that for many may seem like such a border issue, right? We are definitely sounding the alarms that it is not a border issue. This is something that impacts all Texans. As grassroots leadership, we have a hotline, and it is via this hotline that we actually started receiving calls, not just first from families looking for loved ones that, you know, had started the journey to the United States. Somehow, you know, it was months now and they hadn't heard from them, or they heard from them and they were in a prison, right? They say, I'm in a prison, not in an immigration detention center, or, you know, they are expecting a call of people in a detention center, or people having been deported at the, you know, from the border of the US and Mexico, and they're not, they're calling from a prison. And so we actually also started receiving calls from people directly in jail, right? From Briscoe first, and then from Segovia. And so I want to start with, I just wanted to name how it was us as an advocacy group located in Central Texas. How do we even become involved in this conversation? Because this is very symbolic of how everybody, right? It doesn't matter if you are in North Texas, West Texas, East Texas, how this is already, without you knowing, maybe impacting you or the community that you are doing service in. And so, yeah, if we could start with, I'm gonna do the first slide and the second slide. So the first slide, and if we just press on the link, that's going to be an audio call, or that's the audio of a call that we first received. That we received via the hotline.
De 22 meses. Y nos le habla la esposa de Roberto Mejía Díaz, el muchacho que está preso en una cárcel de Segovia. Con la ayuda de Dios y con la ayuda de ustedes le van a pagar la fianza. Entonces yo quería saber, señorita, ¿qué respuesta me puede dar usted ahora? Porque como podrá ver, yo soy una madre con 3 niños chiquitos de 3 años y una bebé de 22 meses. Y nosotros, la verdad, estamos muy preocupados aquí. Y nosotros dependemos de una familia muy humilde, muy pobres. Él por eso se fue a buscar ese sueño. Y lastimosamente, pues, lo agarraron. Ya de haber salido de la cárcel tiene 8 meses. 4 meses en México trabajando para poder cruzar. Y 4 meses que él tiene preso. Confío en Dios, señorita, y con la ayuda de Dios y con la ayuda de ustedes, yo sé que mi esposo va a salir de ahí.
Thank you. Now, this is one of the calls that we got. What we heard is one of the calls that we started receiving from family members of men detained at the Segovia unit, which was the second prison unit after Briscoe that opened up to detain the men arrested under Operation Lone Star, right? Now, as grassroots, last month, we, along other partner organizations and attorneys, we were able to do a visit to the Segovia unit because of capacity, because as grassroots leadership, we are not attorneys, neither criminal nor immigration attorneys, but we were able to visit around 21 men. Of those 21 men, we were able to pay the bond for just 11 men. I want to be very transparent in that we tried to pay the bond for 11 men, but we're only able to pay the bond for 10 men. One of the Segovia, what we uplifted or named the Segovia 11 are 11 men whose cases we uplifted in a very public way, right? To try and advocate for them, not just to be released from Segovia, but then we followed their cases through the immigration side, asking for really discretion for them to be released. And released with their families whom they were trying to, in some instances, reunite with. One of those men, one of the Segovia 11, he when we tried to pay bond for him, his paperwork was actually, it could not be found. like literally no court had documents on him. So there was a man that had been in jail. All of these men had been in prison for more than 120 days, right? And one of them didn't even have paperwork to be inside. And so we had to actually go back a week after and pay bond for him. Now what we see in this second slide, right? And it's really important for us, not just for us as grassroots leadership, Rise for the Austin, but even for me as someone that is directly impacted. And it's important, like, what do I mean by that? Like, I am undocumented. My family, the majority, my siblings are undocumented. Why am I, when I am advocating for people, for this man, for the Segovia 11, I'm doing it very well, understanding that if Operation Lone Star does not end, I would be doing the same kind of advocacy for my own siblings. Because as people, as men that have been here in this country for 20 plus years, that have established a family alive here, if they were ever to be deported, they would do what any other father would do. They would come back in efforts to reunite with their loved ones. And it's important to know that a lot of the men, right, under Operation Lone Star, yes, majority of folks are coming for the first time, but there are some men indeed that are crossing, attempting to reunite with their families after a deportation, right? The majority of men are coming to seek asylum for the first time. And I want to read something, here. This is a picture that whose parents, this is a picture of one of the Segovia 11, whose the parents sent, and they put a text over it, and it reads, él es mi hijo Daniel. Él se fue con una gran ilusión de sacar nuestra familia de la pobreza en que vivimos, de un día tener una casa digna en donde vivir y de tener la esperanza de encontrar un trabajo digno. Hoy se encuentra detenido en Estados Unidos. Nuestra preocupación como padres es inmensa, pues queremos que salga de ahí y que él esté bien. Por favor, le suplicamos con el corazón en la mano que ya lo dejen en libertad para que él pueda continuar con su propósito. Le agradecemos con todo el corazón, sus padres. If we look at this man, it's important for us to know, this is Jaime, this is Daniel, Elvin, Wilter, Elmer, these are fathers, brothers, sons. We need to really humanize, right, the issue. As advocates, we use terms like Operation Lone Star, the name of the policy. We also learn to do reports. We use data. We talk about the number, right, of funds being allocated to create more prisons or to build out and reinforce the infrastructure of the prison system that is Operation Lone Star, right? Roberto brought up, like, there are needs in places like Kinney County by people that are not undocumented, that are not being met. And so this is really at its core, this is not an immigration issue. This is not an incarceration issue. This is an issue about people that is causing harm. This is a policy that is causing immense harm. And if we're gonna have a chance, a minimum opportunity at bringing it down, we need to start learning the names of people that are being harmed like this, right? This is only part of these are only 11 of the Segovia, this is only part of all the men that up to right now have been imprisoned under Operation Lone Star.
Right, thank you. Now we have time where I would like for the four of you to respond to one another if you have questions for one another. And also if you have any other suggestions of what we as people of faith can do about OLS. I know Sister Norma told us to keep our advocacy going. We know that we have a couple letters that we're going to be asking people to sign, but what are, first of all, have a conversation among yourselves, but also if you want to help us move our advocacy forward in what we can do, again, as people of faith to call attention to this issue.
So So one thing I would actually say, going along with this idea of us getting to know everyone's names, getting to understand who exactly are we talking about in these hypotheticals. One thing that might be a little difficult at first, but I think is totally worth it. All of these hearings are public. They are on YouTube. You don't have to leave home. You don't have to live in Texas or be near Kinney County. And I think that particularly for those who are in religious communities and consider themselves people of faith, simply being on the YouTube watching is important for no other reason than you suddenly will hear and see. There's a lot of side remarks that I, as an attorney, I don't have time to address. It's not probably going to help my client in any way, but it comes very differently when it comes from a community. And the comments will be things like, oh, you know, they don't call them by their names. You can tell that these gentlemen, they'll ask them in one big group, do you understand what's being said? And they all look at each other and they might nod, or they might shake their heads and no one will pay attention to them. Or, you know, we will be arguing things such as, you know, please release them. These are somebody's family members. This is, you know, we're asking are for you to follow the rules that you've made. And to have other people there, even though you can't clap or make noise, simply having you as bearing witness, I can't emphasize enough, because that also drives you to action, because you begin to see who the key players are and what they say and how they say it. And so I don't know other ideas, particularly from those of you who are doing the outreach and the grassroots, but that's just one idea that I throw out there, particularly for those who want to understand what's going on. I think in a lot of ways, once you start watching, it doesn't matter if you're not a lawyer, you're going to see just by watching, you know that what is going on is unjust. And it can be as simple as seeing how 5 people in a group are arrested. One of them's given $1,000 bond and another's given $5,000. Why? Why are we treating people randomly and differently when it can mean the difference between of their lives? So that is one suggestion. I don't know if Roberto and others may have other ideas as to what folks can do.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have some ideas. I think that early on it was mentioned already, right? The uplifting, and I'm hoping a follow-up email will go out with. There is already a petition that can be signed on, right? A petition that can be signed. It's a petition to the Department of Justice to open up a formal investigation, right, on Operation Lone Star. That's plainest form is just we're asking the current administration to actually take action, right? And there is a website where that lives and where you guys can also learn a little bit more about Operation Lone Star. But I wanted to provide some context, right? I uplifted that we need to actually humanize this issue, right? Because by doing that, that is already an action that you're taking by actually fighting back against the politicization of immigration that Abbott has mastered already, right? In the political comms, media sphere, right? This is an issue that he is just like President Trump leeching onto, right? And politicizing it for his own benefit. And so, in that call, the reason why I shared it is I wanted to share with people what people both currently inside Segovia and Briscoe and their loved ones are experiencing. What you hear in that call, right, is confusion as to what is the process, like Priscilla has uplifted, right? There is confusion, there is fear, about if people are going to be detained indefinitely, because there is no transparency, there is no accountability on part of the sometimes the assigned counsel, right? We have some attorneys that are not adequately responding or engaging with either the person detained or the loved ones, right? And we also know through us directly engaging with the Segovia 11, right, the men. And if you go to grassroots leadership, we uplifted, right, a letter that was penned by that was signed by all of them, where it talks about the verbal, the physical abuse, right? That is happening inside these prisons. We know that this is something not new to prisons. We also know that Briscoe, even before it opened up as a prison to detain immigrants, was one of the prisons with the most complaints, right, in the state of Texas for conditions violations, right? So yes, we are seeing very much in these prisons that are detaining our immigrants. What has plagued prisons detaining our other brothers and sisters, right? Verbal, physical abuse, the use of really bad food and limiting food. And I wanted to uplift that, you know, I think it's been touched on briefly, like, why should we care about Operation Lone Star? Why, you know, as people that are not directly impacted, right, we need to be uplifting our voice and naming that this is not just a border issue, right? Is that I named earlier how you in your own communities might actually already know a family that is being directly impacted by Operation Lone Star. Like I said, the reason why we became involved is one of the members that we actually work with had a loved one that was detained under Operation Lone Star, right? So there are already people that are trying to reunite with their families and are making their way here and are finding themselves arrested under Operation Lone Star. Priscilla named, right, that there are 6 counties, I believe, actively participating in Operation Lone Star. But it's important to note that in the 200 out of the 254 counties in Texas, 53 of them have already taken the step of declaring themselves a disaster, of including themselves in the disaster declaration, which kind of is the first step that counties are asked to take, right, if they ever want to consider being part of Operation Lone Star. So we see that the writing on the wall, right, where the carrot of money, we haven't touched on it very much here, but this is an operation that is funded by close to $2.8 billion. This was money that is coming out of taxpayers, right? So we all, even the you know, church as a taxpaying entity, like independently, your individual taxes, right? We are funding this. And the last thing that
can you explain this disaster? What are you saying? They're called a disaster what?
It's a disaster declaration, and, you know, please, Roberto, Priscilla, if y'all can explain it further, that would be great. But basically, in order for Governor Greg Abbott to be able to eventually put criminal charges under Operation Lone Star, he had to actually acquire the power to do that. And the only way to do that is under a disaster declaration, right? It gives kind of, I'm not gonna say unlimited, but it gives greater power to a governor. And so he declared, he was pushing for counties to declare themselves a disaster declaration, so that because citing COVID, right, citing health concerns, so that he could then come in and not be challenged on on placing criminal charges. And so, you know, there was advocacy that was done a lot. I think it was close to 100 counties were considering signing on early on. Advocacy was done and eventually ended up being probably less than half of that. But as of right now, we know that there are 53 counties that are considered disaster declarations. And again, that's just for someone, you know, for someone like me that I'm trying to do some, we'll call it political analysis, right? The writing on the wall is that they're a step closer rather than a step further away from actively being enticed to engage in Operation Lone Star, right? And by I mean,
but what criteria do they need, or can they just do it on their own?
They actually, I will let somebody else answer that, because I do believe it has to go through Commissioner's Court. It has to be a vote that is done by the local Commissioner's Court. And so it is something that if you didn't want your county to do, you could show up at Commissioner's Court and say, I don't want to be part of Operation Lone Star. I don't want my county to be declared a disaster declaration zone, if it ever came up for a vote.
Yeah, and so that's what we did that in Hidalgo County in South Texas. So there's a really great organizing group called LUPE, La Unión del Pueblo Entero. They arose out of the farm workers movement in the 70s in Texas, and then have opposed it. And because of their presence at county commissioner court, the 4 counties in the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas did not sign their own disaster declaration. So it's just like a resolution or a few pages where they talk about the immigration crisis. They talk about how Biden hasn't secured the border, and for this reason, they're declaring the apprehensions or the immigration situation a disaster. And so it kind of comes from both ways. Governor Abbott declares an issue, but he really needs support from the counties, from the county commissioners, all like across Texas, to say that they're undergoing some sort of emergency, like a disaster. And so, like Alicia was saying, 50 plus counties have declared disasters, and this is where I was going to add in how we need help right now. So I'm hoping, or I'm really trying to, I think, really hope my organization can sort of move into a route where one of the things that we've been hearing a lot, we've done some studying in Goliad County, in Valverde, in Kinney, in Star, and just based on what we're hearing from just everyday individuals who aren't advocates like ourselves, is a lot of people think OLS, Operation Lone Star, is a failure. They do see it as like a political prop, but they're also happy that, I guess, at least Governor Abbott is doing something. That's sort of what they repeat. So there's a bit of a mismatch, but I think that but also a lot of people sort of feel like they're alone in that thinking because they see their local Facebook page, their sheriff, everything is very local to them, in these rural counties. And because they see people being so vocal and so expressive on Twitter, on Facebook, whatever local social media they use, they think they're alone. A lot of people across Texas think they're alone in their beliefs that we need to have comprehensive immigration reform because the loudest voices in the room are just talking about how this is an invasion, how we need to have a disaster. And those individuals are the ones who show up to county commissioner court. And so what we've experimented with in Kinney is we went out and spent a few days there, talked to a few individuals, one person turned into 20, and now we have like routine weekly meetings. But we're a small organization. Each of us are smaller organizations, and we can't get to all 250 counties in Texas. So I think, a few things is there are a few Catholic churches in Kinney, which I haven't yet been able to really connect with. My understanding is there's a Church of Christ, I think, which is non-Catholic, and they're I get the sense that some of those congregations are hotspots for anti-immigrant discussion. But then the Catholic churches in the area, I think are like, they don't go either way. And so getting them to be a bit more vocal or talking to any of the authority figures in the Catholic Church in these regions, in particular, those 6 counties that Priscilla mentioned, Valverde, Kinney, Jim Hogg, Maverick, Zapata, Webb, getting them to talk about this issue and work with their own congregation to like understand what's going on. I think that would be pretty important. I don't know if the listeners here like have a history in organizing or can set up a meeting within your community if you're in a rural Texas community, but like that's something that we really need, is for more organizing to come up from the ground up and for people just to talk. That's basic, like that's a big part of it. When people start talking about what they're experiencing, they start to realize that it's just a handful of people who are talking about invasion and immigrants. Most people in these communities, in Valverde, in Kinney, in Maverick, in like these very, very rural communities, they don't see a crisis. They don't see danger. They don't see violence. They just see these loud talking voices, and we really just need people to talk and then show up at county commissioner court. So it's really difficult because, like I said, we're a small ship, and we can't be everywhere. Alicia can't be everywhere. Priscilla, myself, Sister Norma is in the Valley. Like we can't all go to these different places. And so if you're able to speak in your church and then also able to ask questions at county commissioner court, that's something that you can do. And also, I mean, I can't can't guarantee that I can provide help. But if you wanted to connect, you can definitely shoot me an email and I will do my best to get back to you about what that might look like. Rural organizing in Texas, but and I'm learning. But that's, I think, something we really need.
And I'm just gonna follow up though really quick. I know I'm occupying probably a little bit more space than needed, but I definitely want to amplify that for those that are, are closer to the central to Central Tech, to Austin, to the Capitol, to the legislator. We cannot forget that this was something that actually has become, Operation Lone Star has become very much an arrest, imprison, deport, well-oiled machine, right? And part of the reason for that is because it is very well funded. Again, we are at the 1 year mark, right? I think it was March 12th, something, March 15th. We marked the 1 year anniversary of Operation Lone Star. And something that we are already seeing is how legislators, how fierce advocates that are in support of Operation Lone Star are already making the rounds to try and ask for more money. And these are not a couple of $1 million. They're asking for a lot of money, right? Again, money that in no way is being allocated to the needs that Roberto has already uplifted, that have been named by the actual members of that community. All Operation Lone Star funds, must go towards either the prosecution of migrants, to sustaining the prisons, right, to paying the guards. So it strictly goes to reinforcing the jail prison system, right, that allows for Operation Lone Star. It is not going, and there is no way that local community members can advocate for any money that is given through Operation Lone Star, like to go to other programs that they might want to fund. And so again, something that we are already seeing at the state level is so there's a Senate Border Security Committee, right, that is already having hearings, just similar to the hearings to like the legal proceedings. But they're hearings where you can tune in. We know that Senator Hinojosa, right, who's actually I believe Webb is within his scope, his area that he represents. He's a member of that, and he's a Democratic, senator there. So there is also measures that we can take individually as a collective to demand accountability, right? On that. We also know that there is a justice and accountability and justice task force. This is going to be an entity that is created by, that is being led and spearheaded by MALC, the House Democratic Caucus, and the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. Now, these are folks that will be attempting to create both policy and take immediate action to respond to Operation Lone Star. So there is a space for us as people to really be very clear that the only way to end Operation Lone Star, two ways: either the Biden administration takes action or we unfund it.
All
right.
Locally. Thank you.
So we need to take action on that, and we'll provide opportunities to follow up on how y'all can engage in that conversation.
All right, great, thank you. And also Monica is going to post the link to the 2 sign-on letters that we have available for people to sign on. And one of them is to the Department of Justice, again, asking for this full investigation. And the other one is to Union Pacific Railroad, because they have been very active in participating with Operation Lone Star, and we're asking them to stop that. So
Yes.
Those are 2 letters, and she's posting the links to those letters now, and we will also be sending them out to the participants as well as the people that signed up that haven't been able to join us.
I actually really want to push on the Union Pacific angle, not only because it's something that people out of state can do, but also because, at least in the example of Kinney County, there are ideas being thrown about that if folks are found near the railroad, they're actually going to try to make it a felony. I don't know how far they'll get, but if it becomes a felony, now we have many additional pressures on these folks. I did pop in and give a lot of folks the YouTube link. Roberto has put in a link to the Department of Justice letter, but Roberto, TCRP, y'all have this amazing website you just did on OLS, right? Like it's pretty, guys, like it's pretty. That also lays everything out in a very easy to understand manner. And I'm pretty sure he'll pop the link in there too.
All right, great, thank you. And Alicia, I want to talk, thank you so much for asking us to put names with the faces and to listen to stories. We have found in our own community that hearing the stories that impact and how our failed immigration system has impacted many of our neighbors here in Houston and around the state and the country. So again, thank you for reminding us to hear the stories. Right now, we're going to move. Sister Marion has been fielding the Q&A, and she's going to ask you some questions from our audience. Sister Marion.
Okay, I think I'm on, right? Can you hear me?
Yes, you are.
Okay. What the first question I have here, and I have to admit that I lost 2 questions because mine went at my screen went out and I had to bring myself back in. So I lost the first 2. So if anyone put the first 2, if you would put them back, that would be great. The question that's here is, what's the involvement of businesses? Are there examples of corporations that are supporting Operation Lone Star and examples of any that are speaking out against it? Anyone on the panel who might want to answer that?
I don't know of anyone speaking out against it. Right, okay, I will say Union Pacific. And then I think at that point, I will just say I focus a lot on Kinney County. I think when we start going to Webb County, places with more population density, this will become a much bigger thing, I think. But please remember that Kinney County has about 4,000 people in the entire county. So while there are definitely businesses, I'm sure, that support, I think it would probably be of a nature of very local, or it would be of the nature of drone companies who would be thrilled to take more of Texas's money, right? So
I just want to add something. There are people speaking against Lone Star, and you would be surprised. County Judge of Hidalgo, I recently had a meeting with him and with the local sheriff, Eddie Guerra, and even the Border Patrol chief, and all against Lone Star operation, okay?
Okay, right now I don't show any questions, but I do have a question in regard to the disaster declaration that Governor Abbott put out. In my reading of some of the materials, I noticed that he extended the time a person could stay in prison because he called it a disaster. And I'm sure I'm thinking it's a part of that disaster declaration. Am I understanding that correctly?
yes. So typically, this is overall, I'm talking generally in law. Generally in law, a misdemeanor is defined by the very simple fact that it's more or less under 6 months that you can be in there. Those of you who are lawyers are probably shaking your head and fists at me right now, but keep it as, keep it pretty general. In this case, our folks are looking at up to a year in theory. So that is the boost it's giving. It'd still be labeled as a misdemeanor, and that is important for any future immigration proceedings they may wish to have. But yeah, they've doubled it effectively.
Okay, I see some more questions here. Are groups which say they are Catholic still trying to harm the work of Catholic charities and other groups? Anyone can answer that?
I haven't heard of anything. I think that's the general silence. Yeah.
Okay, anyone else?
To respond to that, there is a group of the Catholic Vote, that actually put out a lawsuit against the government and the work of Catholic charities. So.
Sister Norma, could you tell us the name of that group?
Catholic vote.
Oh, Catholic vote. Okay,
Mhm.
right. Thank you, sister. Another question, is there anything we can do to get the Catholic churches to take a proactive role? Maybe Bishop Seitz, you might want to answer that.
Could you repeat your question, please?
Is there anything we can do to get the Catholic churches take a more proactive role?
Yeah. If anyone figures that out, please do let me know. But certainly we, as has been said, each of us need to speak up. We need to talk to not only large groups, but just to our friends, our family, and others. And it's not simply a matter of just having a convincing argument. I've learned a long time ago that that's not really what changes people's hearts. It's telling them the story, changing the narrative. As we've spoken of today, you know, the different stories of people, these are real human beings, our brothers and sisters who are suffering so unjustly, thrown into jail for months because they walked on a property that turned out to be private property. You know, it's just, you know, we just have to tell the story and the truth comes out.
I would also add on to that, I think that creating the spaces, right, for this exchange of sharing is part of everybody's responsibility, right? I think that we all have access to other communities, right, outside of our faith communities, right? We have our friends, we have our immediate families, but also about let's think about the resources that we do have, right? This is an at large, I believe, national webinar. Think about more locally, you know. Could you bring this same presentation to your more localized group, right? Mobilize them into more action. We have people, really good news, you know, on the advocacy side, 3 of the men from the Segovia 11 will be released from immigration, from ICE, for the Montgomery Detention Center in Houston. So they will be out and using their own voice, right, to fight against Operation Lone Star. There's already Ivan here in Austin. So creating spaces for people, creating the spaces to allow people to use their own voice to fight against, you know, Operation Lone Star, I think is something that can be done very effectively by spaces like this and more localized.
Sister, if I could just add something to that.
Sure.
I don't think it's been mentioned in terms of action. I know that people who are on this webinar are people who are very concerned, and I'm so grateful for all of you. You know, we could use some help on the border too. There's plenty to do where you live, but and we all should, but if you have the opportunity to come to the border, we're about to see a significant rise in people who are crossing the border as the weather warms up. And we don't have the pool of volunteers that we even had a couple of years ago due to the fear of COVID-19. So you might look into the possibilities of coming to some of the major areas where we're receiving people. We need help in our shelters, and I suspect some of these organizations that are helping with those who are incarcerated could also use the assistance.
Thank you, Bishop. Okay, any other thoughts from anyone else?
Yes, I have one more, which is I think one thing that is very closely connected to Operation Lone Star, just a different level of government, is Title 42 and the Migrant Protection Protocols, MPP, or Remain in Mexico. The US policy right now effectively for asylum is to force people to cross the river. They are not accepting people at ports of entry. So even, you know, if you go to a bridge, like a so-called right way, if you go to a bridge and you ask for help there, they won't accept you. That is that's what has continued since the Trump administration. They started the Title 42 policies and practices as a result of COVID-19, which is probably making it worse because it forces people to congregate in northern Mexico. And then it has continued under President Biden. I know that a lot of Catholic organizations have been pretty outspoken about Title 42 and have called for its ending, but those policies really force people to enter these ranch lands. So I think if Governor Abbott really wanted to try and stop the problem, he would try to get President Biden to end Title 42 and would work to try and get people to move people across bridges, because we're just not going to stop humanity. We're not going to stop the pain and the suffering. People are going to migrate. And that's, yeah, I mean, that's what he should be doing. I had one more thought and now it's leaving me, but yeah, that is, I still don't fully understand why the Biden administration is fighting so hard to keep Title 42 going. But that's one thing that just really needs to end. And oh, the last thing what I was gonna say is Human Rights First puts out really great and just incredible reports on migration and on these policies like Title 42. There was one that came out a little while back talking about immigrants going to the bridges in Arizona. And so in 2017, 2018, before Title 42 and MPP became the main policies, ending asylum as we knew it then, Cubans and Haitians, like 97% of them, of all the immigrants, would seek asylum at bridges. The vast majority of Cubans and Haitians would seek asylum at bridges. Since Title 42 came about, that number has dropped down to like 3 or 6%. So there's a very, 2020, 2021, 2022, there's a very clear connection between Title 42, like immigrants from Haiti, from Cuba crossing to these policies causing the situations where you have thousands of Haitians huddled under bridges, where you have CBP on horseback. Well, that's like their like racist culture, but like CBP on horseback, then grabbing people and abusing Haitians and all of this. So yeah, I think that the Biden administration is just shooting itself in the foot and emboldening Governor Abbott. So that's one thing, is just continuing to put pressure on those policies.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We're about to wind down, and I want to thank our panelists, Roberto, Priscilla, Alicia, and Sister Norma. Your comments and your input have been very informative, and we are going to take your suggestions to heart and move forward with our advocacy. And also to be sure to talk, as Bishop Seitz said, not just in large group, but to our family and our friends, to be able to tell the stories and ask them to listen to the stories and to work and to do what we can. And I also want to thank Sister Mary and Monica and Sister Christine. They were the committee that pulled this together, and I really appreciate their work with getting our panelists and Bishop Seitz. And so thank you very much, and thank you to everybody that has joined us today. And we will follow up with sending out the recording of the webinar, as well as the links that have appeared in the chat box. And so thank you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for having us.
Thank you
You're
all.
welcome.
Thank you.
God bless y'all.
Thank you.
And you too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
She's gonna.